Welcome to The Pulse, brought to you by the Helen Farabee Centers. I'm Henry Florsham, President and CEO of the Wichita Falls Chamber of Commerce. We are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube, and will be rebroadcast on KJTL, Texoma's Fox 18 on Sunday. Our guest today is the Executive Director of Helen Farabee Centers, Roddy Atkins. Roddy, thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here.
To give our viewers some context, tell us about the Helen Farabee Centers. What do you guys do?
Well, that's a very good question, because I think a lot of the folks in the community may not be totally aware of the full brunt of services that the center provides. So I'll try and be brief, but structurally, the center, there are 39 centers like us in the state of Texas. And the center here has been in existence. We celebrated our 50th anniversary last year. And the centers in Texas are tasked with providing public mental health, substance abuse, and intellectual and developmental disability services to the state's target population for folks that are considered most in need of these kinds of services. And it's a unique relationship because community centers like Helen Farabee Center are designated as the local mental health authorities and local intellectual and developmental disability authorities, meaning we're sort of the front door into the public system. And the public system in general is designed to serve those individuals who are most at need and at risk of being institutionalized or being in other more expensive settings. So the centers like ours are established under the Texas Health and Safety Code. It sets a relationship up between local government and state government for the development of a center. And so a center has to have sponsoring agencies, and those sponsoring agencies have to be taxing authorities. So for us, we serve a 19-county area. And so our sponsoring entities are the 19 county commissioners courts and the city of Wichita Falls. So we're a governmental entity. We're also a nonprofit, which is a little bit unique, but we don't have taxing authority, but we have to be sponsored by taxing authorities. And the role of the sponsoring agencies, number one, is to appoint our board of trustees. So our board of trustees are considered public appointed officials. And then secondarily, they help us provide match for the dollars that come down from the state through the state legislature. So anyway, to kind of give you a description of the kinds of services, probably the biggest service line that we have is adult and children's mental health services. And a lot of people think about mental health services as going to see the psychiatrist and getting counseling and maybe going through an intensive outpatient program. That's typically what folks are fairly familiar with. Our services are designed around a target population of individuals in the adult population who have serious and persistent mental illness, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and severe major depression. And there are other diagnoses that make folks eligible for services, but they have to also demonstrate a significant impairment in their social functioning, occupational functioning, and that sort of thing. With kids, it's typically kids who are at risk because of behavioral issues or emotional disturbance that are at risk for having to leave their natural home environment, or they're in special services within a school district. So when we talk about the kinds of services in mental health services, we provide 24-hour, 7-day-a-week mobile crisis response services. We're responsible for the continuity of care and screening of individuals that go into state hospitals. Many of the individuals that we serve are uninsured or underinsured, and we have funding where we buy stabilization beds at our local behavioral health hospitals, such as Red River Hospital and Wise Regional Behavioral Health in Decatur, Texas. We provide the traditional psychiatric nurse practitioner services, along with specialized counseling related to depression and trauma. And then we provide intensive case management services, skills training, services around employment, services around housing, services around eligibility for other benefits, just a variety of different things, because this population typically is considered more at risk. And so that's why the intensity of those services are different. We also provide co-occurring mental health and substance abuse disorders for individuals that have mental health conditions and a substance abuse issue. Probably our second next line of business is intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that has to do with individuals who are diagnosed with mental retardation prior to the age of 18, or have a related condition such as autism, a related spectrum condition such as autism, and a few other conditions. And again, these folks, based on their impairment and functioning, are considered at risk for institutionalization. And so we provide, again, a wide variety of services, from behavioral supports to social services to nursing services to residential kinds of supports. We also work with the private sector that delivers certain services to this population and provide the intensive case management pieces. We also have a crisis program for those individuals. The third line of service is substance abuse treatment. We provide intensive outpatient substance abuse treatment throughout our region. We also function as the outreach, screening, and referral entity to help people who are looking for public substance abuse residential treatment around the state. Unfortunately, there's a shortage of those types of services, and sometimes it's trying to help somebody find a bed in Houston because they don't have the money to pay for it, and then us looking at how we can get them transportation and get them down there when that bed's open, and providing typically supportive services until they can get into that bed. And then we also purchase substance abuse treatment detox beds for co-occurring disorders with Red River Hospital. Finally, our kind of fourth service line is early childhood intervention services. And we took over that program from a local provider in 2016 when they decided they could no longer do that contract with the state. And so early childhood intervention is focused on infants or newborns up to 3 years old who have developmental delays or diagnosed developmental disabilities. And most of that service is provided in home. It's a combination of OT, PT, speech pathology, skills training, case management, and that sort of thing. And it's a service that's designed to keep individuals, those young kids, from having those developmental delays or disabilities impact them so much as they start to go into school. And so that's a critical service. All of our services are designed to work with individuals to keep them in the community, to help them be successfully employed, to help them contribute to the community, to recover, and to do meaning, to have meaning in their life. One of the things that a lot of people think of is that most of the population we serve probably is people that are like at the state hospital. That's actually a small percentage of our population. We have students, college students that we provide services to, folks from all backgrounds that we provide services to. And the difference is that we're tasked with providing a more intensive service than typically something like commercial insurance or even regular Medicaid pays for. So that's sort of what the center does.
For those of you who just joined us, you're watching The Pulse, brought to you by Helen Farabee Centers. We're here with Roddy Atkins talking about mental health issues. Roddy, anytime there's a crisis, especially like what's going on right now, we've got unemployment, people have lost their jobs, people have been isolated at home, away from their networks of family and friends. Tell me what the last couple of months have been like for the Helen Farabee Centers.
Well, for us, it was very quickly changing our service delivery system without necessarily having the approval from the state or federal government when it came to certain Medicaid and Medicare programs that we get paid for. So we very quickly moved to looking at how we could protect our staff and protect the individuals that we serve across all of our service lines, because many of those folks are in at-risk conditions. And so we went to doing a combination of video and audio services primarily, and only bringing in individuals to our sites when they absolutely had to be seen face to face. So for example, if we had to do a lab draw or an injection that couldn't be delayed, we had processes set up in place where we screened folks, had appropriate PPE for both the staff and the folks coming in. And so we turned on a dime, and we very quickly had about 60 to 65% of our staff at any given time working from home. We never shut down any of our sites. We kept those staff, but we were able to do it in a way where we had a minimal number of staff at each site so that they could keep socially distanced. And fortunately, we were able to get things like masks, gloves, sanitizer, a number of those things that people were struggling with. We started a little bit early, and I think quicker than I think some of my counterparts were able to across the state. And that helped us kind of get through a very tight time for a while. But then we were also able to, because we're considered in a disaster, we also have a disaster response role that I'll talk about here in a little bit, but we're able to go up through emergency management services and get PPE when others may not be able to do that. So anyway, we turned on a dime very quickly within 2 days and notified all of our consumers about the changes, posted stuff on Facebook, on our website. It was a really marvelous job done by our staff here to flip things over very quickly.
Today is your 42nd wedding anniversary. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
How the heck did Nancy do that for 42 years?
Well, I'll tell you what, and you know, she's put up with me, which, you know, a lot of people will tell you that's not the easiest thing to do sometimes. But really what she's put up with me with has been pretty much during that 42-year period I've been in this career, and which takes a lot of personal time and that sort of thing. And she's been nothing but supportive. And, you know, it's, you know, she is definitely a better half. There's absolutely no question about that.
Good for you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So you've talked about what you accomplished and how the team pulled together. What would you do if you could go back a couple of months or more and look ahead? What would you do differently?
I think it always comes back down to how well we were able to get communications out. You know, I think, you know, when you talk about what is 95% of a problem, most of the time it's communication. And, you know, when I think about it, I think there are some things that we could learn from about how we could better communicate with our staff and with the individuals that we serve. And I think that's always something that you have to examine, because I think that's probably the biggest issue when a change occurs, is how quickly things are communicated and how well they're communicated. I think that's just in terms of other things, I don't know that I would have done anything different. We were sort of uniquely positioned we've been doing telemedicine. The center's been doing telemedicine since 1999. We were one of the pioneers in the state of Texas to do telemedicine. Back then, the only entity that was doing telemedicine was the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston, and they were doing that into the prison system. And so we've always had the ability for us to move very quickly and to use technology has always sort of been a strength of the center. And so from that piece, I think we move very well. Our staff being able to, we'd already been working long-term because of electronic health record implementation and knowing that we do a lot of work in the field. We had already moved our staff to things like docking stations and notebooks and not standard computers. So with webcams already attached and the ability to hook up from home and having the infrastructure to come into our system to do the work, we were just in a real good position to do it.
So this situation has certainly exposed telemedicine as something that's easier to people thought before. Where do you see that sort of patient care in the future of the Helen Farabee centers?
I used to laugh when we first started, and I'll tell you a little bit of a story. When we first started telemedicine here in 1999, I did it and pushed it because we were having to send there's not a psychiatrist in Haskell, Texas, and there wasn't one in Abilene, Texas. And so I was having to pay a psychiatrist to go out to Haskell, Texas once a week to do a clinic, including the drive time back and forth. And that was 55 miles an hour back then. So you've got 2 hours of road time and 2 hours back. And so it became an access issue. And so we figured out a way to fund building the infrastructure a long time ago. And I won't get into the details of that because that infrastructure fund doesn't exist any longer, but we took advantage of it. And it took us, though, it took work with the Health and Human Services Commission and the Medicaid office. It took about 4 years for us to finally get a pilot for the community centers in Texas where Medicaid would pay for telepsychiatry services. And then over time, you've seen that expand to a degree. But what I will tell you is that one of the advantages I think of this pandemic is that it has forced state bureaucracies and other entities to start thinking creatively out of the box and coming up with flexibility about how you do services. I remember having arguments. I remember testifying before the Texas Medical Board on behalf of telepsychiatry and having to really convince folks that this was really a face-to-face service. And it was hard for them to grasp their minds around that sort of thing. Same with the Medicaid office and their medical director down there. What I see happening down the road is that there's an opportunity to create some flexibilities even more so than we've had before to deliver services. One of the issues that people have is transportation and getting into clinics and seeing folks. And to be able to go into the home using things like Zoom, using Microsoft Teams, being able to do those sorts of things, or being able to talk to someone on the telephone where that wasn't permissible before in terms of a service that would count for anything. I think we're going to see there's not going to be this, we're going to go back to the way we've always delivered services. I think there's going to be some flexibility and give us some more tools in the toolbox. It's not to say that every service needs to be delivered through telehealth or telephone or video or online, because there's always going to need to be that in vivo visit. And some people respond better than others. But I think what ultimately I see is that we're going to see a much broader expansion than it took the first, probably 15 years to get where we are today. or prior to COVID-19.
Yeah, I got to tell you, before this happened, we didn't do much in the way of video calls, but out of necessity, we did. And so our staff met every single morning on Zoom. We've used Teams for calls. We've used GoToMeeting. And I was never comfortable with it before, but we've all discovered how easy it is. And more than that, it's just how effective it is. And it's a time saver too, because if you and I can meet, or we can have a group meeting with people and not have to leave the office and still have that personal engagement that you don't get on a conference call, that saves time. And if that saves time, that saves money. And that means we can be more effective at everything else we've got to do.
And it certainly would have saved all these road trips I've made over the years between here and Austin. Trust me.
No doubt. All right. We've got a comment from Christina Bell. She says, Roddy is a rock star. And she asks, what brought you into this industry in the first place?
Well, that's sort of an interesting story. My dad was a dentist here for 40 plus years. And I started off as a pre-dent student, majoring in chemistry and majoring in biology, minoring in chemistry, and actually got accepted to dental school after my junior year. With my dad, I went down to Baylor Dental School and took a tour of the dental school with the president, who happened to have been a classmate of my dad's. And I decided, no, that's not what I want to do. And I'd been at Texas Tech and had taken a couple of psychology courses. And it was like, wow, this is sort of cool. And so when I told my dad I was going to major in psychology, he was, and change my degree and do something else, he wasn't necessarily thrilled. But that's really the true story. When Nancy and I got married, we came back to and finished up at Midwestern State, and it took me a little bit longer because I had to change my major, but technically I've got a minor both in biology and chemistry. So that's how I got into it. And where it really hit me was after the tornado in 1979. You know that I'm a big tennis guy and played through high school and in college. Well, when we came back to Wichita Falls, I started working at Weeks Park Tennis Center, teaching lessons and working in the pro shop and stringing rackets and stuff like that. And then the tornado hit in 79, and that totally wiped that out. So what really got me hooked, I was still working on my undergraduate degree at MSU. I applied for a job as a recreation therapist on the adolescent unit at the Wichita Falls State Hospital, and enjoyed the heck out of it. I was challenged to develop a recreation therapy program, and I had no idea what the hell I was doing, but I figured it out. And I loved working with those kids, and that's really what sort of got me hooked in this field. And it just sort of, started growing after I finished my undergraduate degree, and then when I finished my master's degree. It's been an interesting journey from working in the hospital setting to being in a community setting over time, and changing roles from being a clinical provider to being an administrator.
Okay. Even more importantly than that, did you watch Tiger King?
No.
Right. If anybody needs to watch Tiger King and help those people out, it's somebody in the mental health field.
I have enough people to help, and our staff has, so I just have yeah.
All right, so you're retiring soon, right?
Yes. June 30th is my last day at the center.
You've been working on a big project for a little while that's going to push back because of COVID-19. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think almost going on three years ago, we started a facility master plan, and it was really to evaluate our facilities here in Wichita Falls. The biggest issues that we have is that 3 of our facilities are probably 60, 70 plus years old. We probably renovated as much as we can renovate, re-roofed. The maintenance stuff is high, but the biggest issue was the fact that we didn't have any space. And candidly, what for good or for better or for worse, our services here have been growing. Our funding over the last 3 or 4 legislative sessions has continued to grow, and our responsibilities have continued to grow. And in some of our facilities, I had 3 or 4 people in an office. And so when we took over the early childhood intervention program, I had no space to put them in. So we very quickly had to find a lease space. And then we became a certified community behavioral health clinic. And our role with disaster behavioral health was going to grow, and we're going to bring on some more staff. And so I had to move some folks from Broad Street and lease another facility here. And unfortunately, where we're sort of sitting is that many of our clients have to go multiple places to get their services as opposed to going to one place. So we went through an evaluation period for about a year, and the board agreed that we needed to look at a way to build a new facility, particularly where we had room to grow, because unfortunately we're landlocked with the facilities that we do own. So after they approved the facility master plan and working with a local architectural firm here, we went out and began looking for property. And so last April, after about, I'll probably say about 6 months of searching, we were able to procure 45 acres off Henry S. Grace Freeway over towards Kickapoo Airport, and I think it's Hammond Road, not Hammond Road, but it's on that part of Henry S. Grace towards Kickapoo Airport. And the plan had been, and we've been working with our architects to develop schematics and things to do, because part of the plan was ultimately we would go out and begin doing fundraising. We've never done a lot of fundraising for the center. We've tried to minimize that. We do get donations and things like that, but we've never done a big fundraising project. And we were hoping to go out in a silent campaign and raise a significant amount of capital, along with some other funding mechanisms that we have to be able to build a new facility. Unfortunately, we had some delays in getting things together with our architectural firm, and some other issues and questions came up. So just as we were getting ready to launch into the sort of the capital campaign, COVID-19 hit. And so what we've done is put a pause on any effort to raise funding towards a new facility for the time being. In my mind, I see, the virus itself is a challenge, but probably the biggest thing is going to be the economic impact on this nation, on this state, and on our local community. And then you throw that on top of the issues with oil and gas prices. I think we're going to have some tough economic times, and I just don't see where it makes sense for us to go out and try and raise funds when everybody else is struggling. So we're going to pause that. It's sort of a regret that I have leaving, that I didn't get it quite as far as I wanted to get get this project going. But I'm fully confident that when the time comes, that the new leadership at the center's going to do a great job. They'll figure out how to get a new facility built, and it'll be an integrated campus where it's a one-stop shop. Folks don't have to go multiple places to get services here in Wichita Falls. It'll be modern. It will look like a healthcare facility and not some sort of institution. And so I will certainly be watching the progress when that gets kicked off.
Roddy, we're going to take a break here for a second. For our TV audience, thank you for watching this TV broadcast of The Pulse, brought to you by the Helen Farabee Centers. For the live stream crowd, stick around. We will be right back. And to everyone watching on Fox, you can visit the Chamber's Facebook page to watch the show in its entirety. Thanks again to Texoma's Fox 16 for airing the Pulse, and to Roddy for joining us. We will see you next week. And we're back. Roddy, how do you define success for Helen Farabee?
I think success for me comes from the client outcomes that we see. When we see our folks getting better, getting the services that they need, us not having waiting lists for services or people waiting for services is a definition of success. So for me, it really it still comes down to what happens to the folks that we serve, and are we helping them live better quality lives? And there are all sorts of different ways to look at that, but that really is, the sort of bottom line. Obviously, we're not successful with everybody that we treat or serve. And then sometimes folks come back and we're successful at 30. It may take 3, 4, 5, 6 times. But the bottom line really comes down to the folks that we serve, and are we able to help them, and are we doing everything we can to help them improve the quality of their lives, be successful, be happier, be functional, be more functioning, have friends, do everything that everybody else does.
We've got some breaking news for those of you who were anticipating the SpaceX launch today. In the battle between the Pulse and SpaceX, the Pulse has won.
All right.
The launch, there's bad weather, and the launch has been pushed back to, they're going to try again on May 30th. So we win. Roddy, what would you tell an 18-year-old Roddy Atkins? What advice would you have for that guy?
To be more patient, to be less self-critical, and to understand that idealism has a role. But, the goal is, you can't let idealism put you in a place where you're not able to work successfully with other people, other entities. I think one of the things that I've learned over time is the world doesn't change immediately, and it doesn't change according to my schedule. And even though I may think something should be a certain way, that doesn't mean everybody agrees with it. And so whether it's in politics or working with the state or trying to, convince city government, county government about the way things should sort of be in the way that we deliver services, it's much more of a chipping and shaping behavior. And so for me, it's that patience and not being critical of myself when I don't get what I want. And that's what I would have told that 18-year-old.
Gotcha. For those of us that have friends, family members, coworkers that we think may be experiencing some sort of mental issues or trauma, what do we do?
Well, there's a couple of things that you can do. Number one, there is first of all, let me kind of talk a little bit about, particularly during this pandemic. Stress is a key factor in everything related to physical and mental health, candidly. I mean, you can't separate the two. And so the first thing that is available to folks is there's a statewide COVID talk line. And they don't take all your personal information. It can be totally anonymous. But the bottom line is that's a resource that's statewide, that's available to anybody in the state, including folks in Wichita Falls and this region. And then there's also a local number that we're supporting through a disaster emergency grant. And we're there. This isn't getting admitted into Helen Farabee Center services. So this is really focused on individual brief counseling, Sometimes it's problem solving. Sometimes folks feel overwhelmed and they need somebody to kind of help them think things through. So what do I do? What other resources that may be available to that person that they're not aware of? So the first step is, number one, in this particular pandemic, being at home, having lost a job, if we've lost, somebody's lost their employment, all of those sorts of stressors at some point can start to feel overwhelming. And I think the main thing is for people to understand that that's normal. That's not an abnormal reaction. It's normal to get frustrated. It's normal to feel sad. It's normal to be scared. And I think the key thing is to reach out. So whether it's reaching out to a hotline and talking to somebody, reaching out to a best friend, reaching out to a pastor. But the main thing is to understand that it's normal and to talk about it. Talking about it and starting to look at maybe solutions and ways to kind of work through those things is the best thing you can do.
Roddy, can you give the hotline number?
And the statewide hotline number for Texas is 833-986-1919. Then the local COVID-19 hotline number is 888-484-0799. And so bottom line is that, if somebody calls and a counselor follows up with them, this is going to be a phone. It's going to be brief intervention. This isn't going into traditional psychotherapy. This is really kind of talking through things with somebody. So those numbers are available. And if somebody's truly in a crisis, we have our regular crisis hotline number that operates full time as well for somebody who really may be in a psychiatric emergency. And that number is 1-800-621-8504. Best thing to do is you can find all sorts of information on our website at www.helenfarabee.org.
Gotcha. Thank you. I've had the chance to attend a couple of regional task force meetings at your place by City Hall, and the opportunity to engage with some of your team. And they're always upbeat and positive. I've got to imagine that for a lot of them, it's a pretty tough job because you're dealing with some very serious issues. How do you keep your staff motivated and pumped up and positive and ready to go?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, and probably one of the best things that we've done over the last 4 years is that we've embraced the concept of trauma-informed care, and understanding that anybody that walks through our door has probably suffered some form of trauma. And when I say trauma, it doesn't have to be sexual abuse, physical abuse. It could be neglect. It could be the death of a loved one. It could be anything that is sort of traumatic to an individual, a disaster, that sort of thing. But anything really that's traumatic to an individual. We also know that care providers suffer. When you're working with somebody who's gone through trauma and you're hearing stories, whether you're a CPS worker or you're one of our case workers or therapists or psychiatrists, and you hear about somebody's issues and there's secondary trauma that occurs from that. So we've begun to do things within our culture of our organization to address trauma, whether it's providing tips to our staff about how they handle things, reminding them about different things, trying to be positive and encouraging, knowing that sometimes folks need to, occasionally some of our staff may, have had the experience of a client passing away that they've worked with for a long time. And how do we work with that person to kind of talk about that? So I think it's trying to create an environment within the center where we try not re-traumatize individuals that are coming into the center by the way that we do things and the way that we communicate. I also think it's the same approach with our staff over time, and we're slowly getting better and better about that. I'm also very proud of the fact that we've done a number of trauma-informed care trainings with other nonprofits and entities within Wichita Falls and our surrounding area, because that's a huge issue, is actually trauma, particularly in young children.
You're watching The Pulse. We're here with Roddy Atkins, Executive Director of the Helen Farabee Centers. We're talking about mental health issues. But right now, I want to ask you this personal question. What's your favorite thing to cook?
Probably brisket, doing it South Texas style, low and slow, over oak.
How long does it take you to smoke a good brisket?
Well, you typically figure about, for each pound, doing it between 240 and 250, about an hour or so. So if it's 15-pound brisket, which I like to cook, maybe 16 hours total, 17.
It takes commitment.
But it's fun.
Roddy, you and Helen Farabee have been really involved in the Chamber of Commerce over the last few years. Talk to me about that. Why does it make sense for you and your organization to participate with us?
Well, bottom line is even though we're nonprofit and governmental, we're also a business, and we employ folks and we recruit people, and we want people to come to Wichita Falls who work in this field and who work for us. That's an important caveat. Candidly, nonprofit doesn't mean you can lose money, right?
Yeah, we're a nonprofit too.
You know exactly what I'm talking about, Henry. But the real thing for me is having an engagement with the center, with the business community, to help sort of begin is part of our effort to destigmatize the types of services that we deliver. Because whether you're an entrepreneur, you own a company here, I will guarantee you that you have employees with mental health and substance use issues. You have employees with family members who may have disabilities. You may employ some folks with disabilities. And so the bottom line is I think I look at it as an opportunity to begin to normalize conversations, just like we talk about taking care of our heart, taking care of our blood pressure, taking care of our diabetes. We've got to be able to have those normal conversations about taking care of our mental health, not being ashamed and embarrassed about seeking help when we need it, because it's not a sign of weakness. That's actually a real sign of strength when somebody reaches out for help. And so it's kind of slowly trying to engage the community even more in destigmatizing things that are surrounded around mental health and disabilities and substance use.
Well, we appreciate the support, Roddy. And shameless plug for anybody else that may be watching this. If you don't run a traditional business, if you're in a nonprofit or some other sort of organization, our mission at the Chamber is to build a better Wichita Falls. And so if that sounds interesting to you, we ought to talk. And so reach out to us. Roddy, for somebody that runs an organization, whether it's a company or whatever, what can they do to best ensure the mental health of their employees and their volunteers?
I think there are a number of things that companies can do. Whether it's providing, number one of the things that we do is actually provide training. So one of the things that I'm proudest of is that we do mental health first aid classes. And this is sort of, when you think about mental health first aid, and we do it for anybody that wants to have that training done, or groups that want to have that training done. And what it really does is helps an individual, number one, learn a little bit about mental health, learn how to be comfortable talking to somebody that they think may be in distress, and kind of knowing what to do. And so it's kind of like first aid from a physical standpoint, where you're not being a counselor, you're not being a professional, but you're sort of bandaging things and saying, okay, yeah, you better go see the doctor, or maybe we really need to get professional help in here now, since I see that bone sticking out your leg. So mental health first aid is one of the things that I'm very proud of, that we've done a number of trainings in this community and across our region in, and that's available to the local community, or to folks in the local community. Secondarily is we do a program called Assist. Every one of our staff have gone through it and will continue to go through it, and that's applied suicide intervention. And clerks go through it, accountants go through it, non-clinical people at our organization go through it. But what it's designed to do is, how do you intervene with somebody that you come across that actually may be suicidal, and what do you do? A lot of people think that, if you ask somebody if they're having those feelings or their thoughts, that's somehow going to trigger them to act. That's absolutely not the case. Absolutely not the case. And so it's a training that we have done in the community as well, to help people recognize the signs and symptoms of potentially someone who may be suicidal, and how you can intervene. So I think those kinds of things. I think having employee wellness programs that focus on mental health, physical health, those kinds of things, because again, those two, physical health and mental health are dramatically tied together. If your mental health is not where it should be, it's going to impact your physical health care, and vice versa. And so this is, from my perspective, this is sort of kind of getting ourselves as human beings realigned again, to realize that our brain is actually part of the rest of our body, and it's not some sort of separate thing.
Roddy, what's the biggest challenge facing the Helen Farabee Centers?
I think the biggest challenge always is making sure that, we can't control what resources necessarily come down from the legislature or different things like that. I think the biggest challenge is to make sure that we continue to get our share of the funding for this area. And that's a constant battle. I think that's one of the biggest challenges. I think probably the next biggest challenge is dealing with some of the bureaucratic rules sometimes that we have to deal with. But it really sort of comes down to funding and actually keeping a solid employee pool, because technically there are a shortage of behavioral health providers throughout the country. So it's not like there's a plethora of psychiatrists, psychiatric nurse practitioners, counselors, case managers, and other behavioral health professionals. And so it's that challenge of keeping that workforce in place. So those three things.
Roddy, who you reach out to when you've got a situation like this or something you haven't faced before? Is there somebody else in your industry or a group that you engage with to bounce ideas off and to learn from?
Probably, there are probably 3 or 4 other executive directors in the state and it's a close-knit group of people, but there are probably 3 or 4 that I go to because I know of their backgrounds and their special knowledge. But I would also have to say the executive director of the Texas Council of Community Centers. She's one of the most knowledgeable persons I've ever worked with. And when I really have a hard issue to deal with, she's probably the first go-to I give a call to.
We talked a little bit about companies earlier and what they can do if they identify somebody with an issue. What role do you think company culture plays on mental health?
I think that obviously company culture plays. If if you're a high stress, negative sort of culture, then obviously you're going to have, and when I say high stress, high demand, it's not that stress is terribly bad for you, but it's whether you have the outlets to relieve that stress and to sort of put it into perspective. So high stress, high demand sorts of jobs, along with, I think it comes down to a culture. Is that a positive culture? Is it one that encourages creativity? Is it one that appreciates effort? Most everything is not totally about money. A lot of it is how you actually treat your employees, and do you respect what they have to say? You might not always agree, but do you respect? Do you encourage? Do you thank and appreciate the efforts that they put out? Do you recognize them? And so I think if your company doesn't do those things, then you're likely to have some folks that are pretty miserable. And the likelihood is if they're very miserable, they're going to have other issues going on in their life.
What do you do to relieve stress?
I am, number one, I still, up until, up until COVID-19 hit and there was a little bit of a restriction, I'm still a weekend warrior at tennis. And then pretty much every day I'm either walking or jogging the rest of the week. And so for me, it's that go, after work, go home, have some time to myself to take an hour walk or half hour jog and a half hour walk and kind of clear my mind, relax, process things through the day. And that helps me more than anything else. Playing tennis on the weekends and working out, love it. The other things that help to me are doing projects that have closure. A lot of stuff in my world is open-ended. And so I enjoy vacuuming because I can see a finished product. It's sort of like cooking a brisket. There's a finish to it. So building a gate or a fence is relaxing to me because you get a finished product.
Vacuuming. Roddy, I heard it here first. You're watching The Pulse, sponsored by Helen Farabee Centers. We've got about 8 minutes left in the show today. So when you talk to your colleagues in other cities and states during a situation like this, what's different in your response and Helen Farabee's response to a crisis like this to maybe somebody who runs a mental health center in a larger city?
I think one of the differences is that we don't have as many silos to deal with. One of the nice things about being in a center this size, and even a region, even though our region is 16,255 square miles, we know everyone. I mean, I see people, whether you see them at United or around that, you have collaborations that are more easily established than you do in a Fort Worth, Dallas, or Houston. And so, our relationships with other folks in the community are absolutely critical, whether it's through the chamber, whether it's with Adult Protective Services, other providers, United Regional. In those larger cities, it's harder to navigate those things and to establish those coalitions and relationships. And we are so very fortunate to have that in Wichita Falls in this region. And I think that's the biggest difference. It makes it easier for us to get things accomplished. And I really think that's it, whether it's in a pandemic or not.
What do you think is the biggest hurdle right now with us trying to get back to normal, whatever that looks like?
I think there's going to be fear still of the virus. I think that's going to be a big driver. I think, right now, to be candid with you, we're not seeing, for example, our crisis line is not busy. Our hotline for COVID-19 has hardly been touched. I don't expect to start seeing things until we start feeling more of the economic impact down the road. And particularly folks that were sort of vulnerable to begin with, that lost jobs. That's where I think some of the things that we have to offer are going to come into play. That fear factor, I think, is going to keep people from necessarily going out like they used to. And that's going to impact that's going to continue to impact our economy. I sort of predict that we're going to have a second wave of this. I think a lot of the experts would agree with that during the fall. I don't know how bad that's going to be, but I think there's, as we reopen, it's not going to go back to where we were before. And it's going to be, in my view, a longer recovery. I mentioned that we have a role with disaster response. Of course, the state's in a declared emergency, and so is the nation. And so we're managing actually this one grant right now that is short term for crisis counseling. Long term, we'll be managing a recovery support grant that will likely last 9 months to a year. And so I think the repercussions of this for us are not going to be so much when you look at the data. If you go to Austin or Fort Worth or Houston, you see a lot more of the issues related to the infections and the death rate. We haven't necessarily seen that totally in our region to the same extent, but I think it's going to be more of what's happened to jobs and the economic impact that's going to drive people more into feeling desperate, frustrated, feeling like they don't have any options.
I think you're right, Roddy. I think we have not seen the worst of it in terms of the impact on our community. A lot of businesses, and I'm not going to say everyone, but a lot of businesses can make it a month or two of being either partially or completely shut down, whether they just survive on savings or credit card or something. But at some point, something's got to give. This is the biggest debate of our lifetime, certainly of mine, is how do we balance opening up business while protecting people? And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
I also think the other stressors that are out there for people, besides childcare issues, economics and that, unfortunately, the political discourse is a stressor. In my opinion, it's a stressor. I think so one of the things that I encourage people to do is quit listening every day to stuff around COVID-19, because all you're doing is traumatizing yourself multiple times per day when you're constantly listening to this stuff on the news or the political discourse. You need to take a break from it. And, that's what bothers me more and plus there's so much disinformation that's out there. No matter what side you sit on, there's just disinformation about this pandemic. And, if you're so wrapped up in it, you are, and you're involved paying attention to it all the time, you're actually traumatizing yourself. Yeah, and so, take a break.
There's a lot of angry people out there. I've got friends on Facebook that post 20 times a day. Every post is political, explaining why the other side is wrong, and it's just horrible. Okay, so Roddy, we've got about 30 seconds left. Say you're trying to hire a mental health professional from somewhere else and get them to move here. What is it about Helen Farabee Centers and about Wichita Falls that you tell them?
I talk to them about, do they have a passion for this kind of work and the population that we deal with? Do you want to be in an innovative center? And do you want to be in a community that will support you and appreciate the work that you do? And the fact, there are the other factors in terms of the low cost of living. But the bottom line is, I always tell people, in Wichita Falls, is big enough to stay hidden if you want to, or it can be like the smallest town in the world if that's what you want it to be.
Yeah, a little big town or a big little town, either way. Well, folks, that's it for today's edition of The Pulse. Thanks for joining us, and thank you to Roddy Atkins and to our sponsor, Helen Farabee Centers. This show can be found in its entirety on the Chamber's Facebook page and YouTube channel at texomashomepage.com and on KJTL Texoma's Fox 18 each Sunday. Join me next Wednesday when we focus on entrepreneurship with my guests, Misty Kelton from Monarch Motor Speedway and Scott Painich from Horseshoe Bend Cellars Vineyard and Winery. I'll see you then.